Let us sit for just a couple of minutes to settle down. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddham Dhammang Sanghang Namasami. This morning I was speaking about the Buddha's description of dukkha, and I took you up to the description about not getting one's wishes is dukkha. I would like to speak now about the last sentence in the Buddha's description of dukkha. He said, Panchupadana Kanda Dukkha. The 5 aggregates of clinging are dukkha. Actually, he said, Sankitena Bhikkhave Panchupadana Kanda Dukkha. He said, in brief, O monks, the 5.
Sound, not everybody is able to hear.
Still, no? In brief, oh, it sounds so loud.
I say also the noise from outside. If we close that doors with the doors. That one in particular, this one is pretty.
Okay, we're waiting for the sound to be fixed.
Yeah, that one.
Okay, I'm going to look at this object while speaking with the intention for the Dhamma to go in here and come out over there. The Buddha said, Sankitena Bhikkhave Panchupadana Kanda Dukkha. In brief, O monks, the 5 aggregates of clinging are dukkha. This is the Buddha's most concise, comprehensive description of the process of how we suffer in just those few words. The 5 aggregates can be broken down into form, which is the body, the feeling, which is the very first initial sensation aspect of any experience, even before there's any clear perception of the object or any clear understanding. There is the feeling aspect, which the Buddha mentioned as pleasant, unpleasant, and neither pleasant or unpleasant or in between. Then there is the perceptions, which is the time that some situation or some experience is clear enough that it can be defined as a single thing, such as the color blue. Then there are the sankhara, which is called formations or fabrications. In this case, I follow Bhikkhu Analayo in emphasizing volitional formations. So that is when we know what we should do in a particular situation. That's where the sankhara has come up. It's just the mental aspect, the beginning of the creation of karma, doing an action, which will have a karmic result. And then the last of the khandhas is called consciousness, which is the knowing faculty. And in this case, in association with dukkha, I would emphasize about consciousness. It has the quality of knowing a phenomena or a situation as a compact entity with a kind of a boundary, what is part of that thing and what is outside of that thing. So there's a sort of a bubbling mass of different shades of light and darkness and different colors and different shapes and different sizes in this room, all striking the eye. And when the eye moves about, that bubbling mass of colors and shapes is ever changing. What consciousness is able to do is to single out and name, excuse me for using your name, that person is Aditi. So I can tell where the edges are, what the shape is, what the color is, and recognize that. And all the parts are all parts of Aditi, the feet, the hands, the body, the hair, the face, all of them are parts of one item. So consciousness has done that. It's put it together into something that can be known and also something that can have a continuity. So if I look away and I say Shari, and then I look back and Aditi is still there. So it has that ability of creating continuity and compactness and identity. So now that's what the five khandhas are, the five aggregates. Then in that Pali word, there's the phrase, part of the word is upadana, which is usually translated as clinging. It can also be translated as taking up. So something can be taken up as an identity, meaning in my conscious knowing of myself, as a being that has a definite boundary, like up to here is myself and something else over there is outside of myself. It has a continuity in time. The same person who was a baby 74 years ago and now is an old lady, all of those are the same person. So that consciousness has created that continuity in time, that compactness of identity, and is trying to cause that identity to be something pure and perfect, which will exist forever, which of course is not able to happen. That's why it's part of dukkha. So this upadana, this taking up, a person could think that the form or their material body is themselves or part of themselves. One could think that the feelings are themselves or part of themselves. One could think that their perceptions belong to you. They're a part of yourself. That your intentions belong to you. They're part of yourself. Or that your consciousness, your knowing faculty, is a part of yourself. It's a taking up. But it's even stronger than that. You could think of it as being like, I like to think of the five khandhas in how they would operate together when there's an emotional reaction. And this is, emotion is not really a word that was used in that way by the Buddha. The Buddha was well aware of emotions, but they just didn't conceptualize about it the way we do nowadays. But to me, it's quite helpful to see if you suppose that a terrifying goblin or a wild tiger comes into the hall, then I would have an emotional reaction. And that emotional reaction has only one purpose. It's to protect my existence. So the body would become very alert. The hearing would become very sharp, and the seeing would become very sharp. Even the smelling would become very sharp to look at that object and see if it's really a tiger or whether it's just an apparition. And then the body would prepare itself. The blood would flow to the hands and the feet, and the adrenaline would start flowing. So I would be able to leap up and jump out of the chair and run away, or perhaps I'd pick up a chair and hit the tiger on the nose or something like that. So the body has prepared itself. And then there's a feeling, strong feeling that connects with that. And the feeling is giving me the mental energy to do what I have to do for my life. And then the perception, I don't know if it could be, it's only a dog or something that's not actually dangerous, or it might be a dangerous wild animal. So then the perception, the cognitive part of the mind is working very hard to know the truth about the situation. What is it? And hopefully to get a good perception. Now, if I have been previously conditioned, say something very frightening happened this morning, and I was still kind of like wired up from having a scare this morning, that could cause me to think it was a tiger when really it was some other animal that was not dangerous. So I could have a biased or mistaken perception based on the feeling that arising, and the feeling that's arising is partly influenced by the underlying tendencies of the previous conditions that happened for that. But then if you suppose that upon accurately or not, I come to the conclusion that it is a dangerous wild animal, and then I would scream and shout and run away or do something to seek after safety. So then I would create that intention to do something. So that's how quick and fast and instantaneous the emotions are, and they're all driving for one thing: to survive. Now, when the Buddha, or when the text as it's explained in the Abhidhamma and most of the traditional teachings about the five khandhas, take it in a more long-term, I could say intellectual or philosophical way, that if you have a concept that this is yourself, and you believe in a concept, and then based on believing in a certain concept, you cling to that concept, and you could stand up and debate about that concept and defend your point of view. And so that side of it is also happening. But it's happening at many different levels, that there is a taking up of these different aspects of our experience and creating them as a self which needs to be protected, which needs to continue with its existence. I could think of it as being something like a chemical reaction. If you have two elements that are able to react to each other, and then you put them together and you get the right conditions, the right temperature, or so forth, then a chemical reaction starts. And the one chemical takes up the other chemical, and it forms a compounded chemical. So khanda means a compound. So that compounded thing is created, and there's a tremendous strength in that compound. It's very difficult to break a compound once it's gotten together. You'd have to know the right method to be able to break up something which was compounded together. And even breaking up that compound could be releasing so much energy, it would be like a nuclear reaction. So then the Panchupadana Khanda is the way that the mind has taken up these different aspects of our experience and bonded them together as a self, something so powerful. Feeling, or Vedana, the pleasant, unpleasant feeling, is a very crucial center point of this whole process. It's said that feeling is a karmic result because of the preceding causes and conditions. It arises into a feeling that we can experience. Then, based on the choices that we make and the actions that we do, whether it be actions of body, speech, or mind, that is creating the subsequent conditions that are expected to mature in subsequent feelings that might be experienced as pleasant, painful, or neutral. So by the time one feels a feeling, you can't undo or change the feeling that has already arisen. You just have to receive it, know it, and understand it. That feeling is actually part of dukkha. It's part of a karmic result. It just needs to be understood. But then beyond that, the forming of the perceptions, the volition, especially, which is the intention, and how the mind obsesses or thinks about those things, those are all actions which we do have a choice about. So the moment of feeling is where, through our lack of wisdom or through our underlying tendencies, it's a possibility that we can allow the feelings to cause these other mental factors to bond together in something as powerful and as instantaneous as a chemical reaction, which is containing a great deal of energy and strength, and which is difficult to get out of. Or else we may choose not to do that experiment, not to put all of the elements together in the bottle to cause that chemical reaction, but instead to hold some of them aside. So before jumping to the conclusion that it's a dangerous wild tiger, one could inquire, is that really true? Or even one could transcend the visceral fear towards the tiger and just look at it from a wider point of view, saying, perhaps it's my karma to meet this being And if we have the karma to meet in a fatal encounter, that's what it's going to be. Or perhaps we don't have the karma to meet together in that type of encounter. And the tiger may just look at me and walk away. It doesn't need to be a fatal encounter. The fear that I had, that visceral fear, doesn't have to happen. So by changing my perception, I'm not starting that chemical reaction. By changing my volition or my intention, I'm not starting that chemical reaction. I'm not feeding that reaction. By choosing to frame my conscious experience in a different framework from a wider perspective, I would be choosing to cognize it or understand it in a different kind of way, which is not feeding that chemical reaction. So in that way, the upadana part, the taking up, can be removed. And then the khandha is just the khandha. It's not an upadana khandha. It's not a khandha of clinging. It's not a khandha of dukkha. The body is just the body. The feeling is just a feeling. Our perception is just a perception. An intention is just an intention. Consciousness is just a moment of consciousness, a moment of awareness. And so in that way, just the very same moment where suffering landed, where suffering became established, where suffering took hold, it's exactly in the same moment where suffering does not need to land, does not need to become established, and does not need to take hold. One of the most beautiful and popular suttas about Vedana, or feeling, is the one that's called the second arrow. After we leave here, if we know your email address through your registration, we'll be sending out the links to the different suttas that I'm speaking about today. The Buddha said that an unlearned, ordinary person feels a pleasant feeling, a painful feeling, or a neutral feeling. And a learned, noble disciple of the Buddha also feels a pleasant, painful, and neutral feeling. So what's the difference between them? So the unlearned person, now this unlearned person could be you when you were an immature child who didn't understand things, or you before you didn't know anything about the Dhamma, or it could be you some of the time. Sometimes you may be like an ignorant child, and then at other times you may be experiencing based on wisdom and insight. So it's not an absolute dichotomy between two completely different people. It could be one person at different times, depending on the situation and how you're practicing, and how long and with how much sincerity you've been making the effort. So the ignorant person gets to experience two feelings. It's called physical and mental, kayika and chaitasika feeling. Kaya is the body. And so now we know that the aggregate of feeling is it's a mental aggregate. It's part of the mind. So the body is like the earth element, the air element, the fire element, and so forth. So in materiality doesn't have feelings. Materiality is just the elements. But when they talk about a kayika, feeling. This is the first experience it's at the boundary between the body and the mind. It's where the body encounters the mind, or where the mind encounters the body. And I actually include the brain as being part of the body. So the mind could experience something that's happening in the brain. And I am going to call that part of this physical feeling. So like, for example, if you get home from work and you expect your beloved child or your beloved spouse to be there at home to greet you, but the house is empty and there's nobody home, then you could feel alarm. And this is not because you have a bad intention or because you're being unskillful or something like that. It's just that because of learning, the brain was wired up to expect something when you got home, and something different. A reality was not matching what the brain was predicting. So that causes a little, like a jolt, suffering. So, but then the second part, this mental, chaitasika, so that's described as, it's translated as mental, and it also means intentional. So they say chaitana is kama. So the chaitana, those are the intentions, the formations that determine whether a kama, whether an action is leading to your future subsequent happiness or pain. And chaitasika, that intentional thing, is about both what you intend towards the different situations in your life, and also in terms of like what you intend in terms of what you're paying attention to. So the mind runs out to the object and grabs onto an object and starts to perceive it in certain ways. So that's all part of like intentionality, the whole aspect of like focusing on something or seeing some aspects of it. You see the aspects that you expect usually are the ones you see, and the aspects that you don't expect are the ones you don't see. These are all parts of intention. So this first part, the kayika vedana, the bodily or feeling, or the physical feeling, you don't need to do anything about that. That's just part of reality. But the mental part is an unfortunate choice. When an unlearned and ordinary person experiences a painful physical feeling, and they sorrow and wail and lament, beating their breast and falling into confusion, then that whole process of the upset and distress and falling into confusion, that's the second arrow. Then the other unskillful thing they do, when they're touched by a painful feeling, they resist it. So there's all kind of tensions and distortions that happening because of this resistance, this pushing away. And then there's yet a third unskillful thing that could happen when touched by a painful feeling. They could look out for some sensual pleasure because they don't understand any escape from a painful feeling apart from sensual pleasures. Now, I don't know how many of you have ever been in a really painful, difficult, horrible situation and then feeling really traumatic. And somebody says, here, take a drink, have a glass of brandy. You know, that will like help you to overcome the trauma. But even if you don't use substances in that way, you still might be tempted to turn on the computer and scroll through your Facebook while you're processing the anxiety and distress that you feel. The mind could go to something that's distracting. And that's part of this trying to escape from a painful feeling by looking for a sensual pleasure. So like entertainment is part of a sensual pleasure. So they regarding the pleasant feeling, they don't understand the origin, the ending, the gratification, the drawback, and the escape. So pleasure and happiness are impermanent. Even a very innocent pleasure like smelling a beautiful rose or some fresh flowers in the garden, or even a sublime pleasure like the pleasure of meditation. If you cling to it and want to take refuge in it and want to make it permanent, then subsequently you'll be disappointed. And that's the danger. And then the escape is letting go and not clinging to it, just letting that happiness or that moment of happy, pleasant feeling. A feeling is just a feeling, don't hold it. And then we manage to escape from the danger with regard to the pleasant feeling. The unlearned person is attached to their feelings. They're attached to their pleasant feelings and they're attached to their painful feelings. Even if you think, I don't want painful feelings. And yet, if somebody scolds you and gives you a painful feeling that way, you could spend hours afterwards going over it and reviewing in your mind how that person scolded you and what that painful feeling was, and trying to reimagine how you could make it have been different than it was, and even though it's something that already happened in the past. Or if you have a situation that's unsatisfactory and you keep on thinking and planning and designing how you could get away, how you could correct that situation and make it different because of not being content with the way things are. And from that discontent, always trying to endlessly reform, make it, fix up the furniture, repair it, clean it, replace it, get something better. And this continuous process of turning around and around is happening because of being attached to feeling. But the Buddha said, if you are attached in that way to any of the three feelings, then you are attached to rebirth, old age, and death, sorrow, lamentation, pain, sadness, and in distress. Being attached to feeling is being attached to dukkha. That's what the Buddha said. But the noble disciple only experiences the one feeling, translated here as the physical feeling. And I don't think it has to be limited. You know, I was talking with someone earlier, there's a famous debate between philosophers about whether there's something about the nature of reality. They wanted to know whether a feeling is just a concept or whether it's a real thing. And so their companion, who was also a philosopher, picked up a heavy boulder and dropped it on their foot. I said, well, what do you think? Is it real? But for the one who is wise, a feeling is just a feeling. If you come home and your dearly beloved who you expected to be there is not there, and there's a moment of distress, it's just a feeling. There are many different possibilities of what could happen in the rest of that story. You know, it might be that they just, went outside for a breath of air and they're going to be back in a minute. We don't know. But if the feeling can be just a feeling before that, getting excited, getting distressed, getting worked up, getting upset, then they've only had the one feeling. When they are touched by a painful feeling, they do not resist it. They accept the painful feeling. So the painful feeling is the result of previous conditions. You can't change it, you have to accept it. By the way, in the training of mindfulness, as it's popularly taught these days in terms of like vipassana meditation or secular vipassana meditation, there is quite a lot of emphasis on this non-judgmental acceptance of whatever might arise in during a meditation. And some other Buddhists, perhaps who are more fully trained in the full extent of the Dhamma, have cautioned to say, be careful. Mindfulness is not just about accepting everything. Mindfulness is about making the distinction and knowing what's skillful and what's not skillful. So mindfulness is able to tell the difference between some mental state or some intention or some mental thinking coming along, or some reaction coming along, which is a skillful, wholesome reaction, or even some action that one may do, which is skillful and wholesome. And knowing that it's skillful, then one can continue doing it again and again. And then being able to recognize something is not skillful. And if it's not skillful, as soon as we recognize it, if we know how, we may just drop it. So that is a part of mindfulness, is being able to tell the difference between a skillful and an unskillful action, and to abandon the unskillful actions and keep the skillful ones. But here in this sutta, when they're talking about a feeling, when touched by a painful feeling, they don't resist it. This really is what the secular Buddhists were trying to say when they talked about mindfulness practicing non-judgmental acceptance. So it could be that the thing that we're experiencing is really painful, deeply painful. The loss of a dear one, some social, interpersonal situation, which is very painful and difficult. Even facing one's own disability and death when the mind has not yet become prepared and able to accept that. At the first instance, these experiences can indeed be gravely painful. If a person has mental illness and if they suffer from depression or anxiety, before they have learned how to work with that, those painful feelings can last for a long time. That distress can take a lot of difficulty. But the Buddha is saying, actually, at the level of feeling, not having repulsion towards the painful feeling, but accepting the painful feeling is the best way to go through it and to eventually be able to transcend the pain and come out the other side as someone who, with wisdom, has penetrated and fully understood what pain is, how it works, to then become no more controlled by pain, no longer limited, bound up, or like a puppet on a string, forced to react to pain, but instead able to be like beyond pain. So you know what pain is, you know what dukkha is, but you don't have to take it on. You don't have to pick it up. And this learned disciple does not need to escape from painful feeling by way of going to sensual pleasure, because with this true wisdom and understanding, they know that when one becomes disenchanted with suffering, one lets go, the passionate reactions let go, and one is able to experience freedom in relation to those objects. And experiencing that freedom, we know the freedom, and knowing that freedom, we can recognize that to that extent, the work has been done. We're finished with suffering. And knowing that freedom from suffering is the true happiness that we seek. So then this wise disciple experiences all the three feelings in a way which is detached. This is not a mentally ill kind of disassociation or being oblivious to reality. Instead, it's being fully present, fully knowing, fully experiencing that reality, but not having any obligation to pick it up and to make that a part of this merry-go-round of existence, not to feel that we must react to those kinds of feelings. In that way, neither undesired things nor desired things would not disturb the mind. They would not be repelled by undesirable things. They've gone beyond favoring and opposing, or liking and disliking. They've become, in a way, able to fully accept reality. With that which is cleared, then there's nothing to be disturbed about. The mind becomes completely solid, beyond any kind of disturbance. And in that state of full equanimity, there is the possibility for the full knowing and seeing, for going beyond this conditioned world and for obtaining the unconditioned. So I think that might be enough for now. So we can go now to some sitting meditation. For those who are on the Zoom, you may like to know that at 3 o'clock, we'll have some further discussion.